If there's anyone from the school district who wishes to, are you ready to come up? Please, welcome. I'm 3rd District Councilor Bryn Lovejoy-Grinnell. Also present are Council President Helen Hudson, Councilor Tim Rudd, Councilor Khalid Bey, Councilor LaToya Allen, Councilor Joe Driscoll, Councilor Steve Thompson, Councilor Mike Green, and Councilor Joe Carney. Good afternoon,
Good afternoon.
Superintendent. I'll just start out by saying, would you please introduce yourself?
Yes. Good afternoon. First, good afternoon, President Hudson and councilors. My name is Jaime Alicea. I have the honor to be the superintendent of the Syracuse City School District. I want to say thank you first for taking the time to listen to us and for us to answer the questions that you may have regarding the athletic field at Fowler High School. It is a field and a school that is very important to me because I was the principal at Fowler from 1997 to the year 2000. And during my tenure there at Fowler, I was promised at the principal that the school was going to get a new athletic field. Going back during the years that I was there and knowing that at that time, the city and the district began to look into turf fields. And the first one that was done was Henninger, and we were told that Fowler was going to be next. Then after that, they went and did Corcoran, and they said, well, Fowler will be next. Then they did Nottingham, and they said, well, Fowler will be done through the JSCB funding phase 1. And during that phase, there was not enough funding to do the athletic fields at Fowler, and we were waiting for JSCB 2. And we know that where the building was built, we know that there are some conditions there, and we're here, we have the experts, I call them the expert, that will answer any question that you may have regarding the field at Fowler. We know that you have to be responsible to the taxpayers. We have to be responsible to the taxpayers, but I have 900 kids that have been without a field for years, and we have promised them that is coming, and most of them are here today to see the conversation, to see what politics is all about, and the relation, that the ongoing communication that takes place between adults that want to do what's best for the city, for the students in Syracuse.
Thank you, Superintendent.
You're welcome. Sorry, that was a long introduction.
One quick question. Superintendent, could you tell me what is the average cost for a field?
It depends on
let's
the
just throw it out
facilities.
there. What was Corcoran's cost? What was Henniger's cost? What's the cost of a field?
It been between 4,000 to also 10,000, so it depends on the year when the fields millions. Sorry. Oh no! If it was 1,000, I can do 2 or 3 myself in their area. Yeah. Millions of dollars. So
this is grossly overpriced. But
yes, yeah. So.
Well, is it 20 million completely for just Fowler, strictly for the field?
It's not. It's all the fields. It's not only the football field, but there are the baseball field, the tennis courts, and several fields in the area.
Have to get it just
The athletic complex. Yes.
Okay.
For the state champion soccer team?
Is the state champion soccer team a Fowler? Yes.
Oh.
So for Nottingham, it was $9 million. For Corcoran, was $8 million. Henninger was $5 million. But again, Henninger was the first field that it was done.
So I think I speak for all of us up here in saying that Fowler deserves a field, that the kids at Fowler deserve a field. They deserved a field a lot earlier than 2019. They deserve a field a lot earlier than 2021, which is, I think, the earliest we could be seeing a field if this resolution were passed, or this item were passed. These kids have been without a field for way too long. There are sunk costs that the district has already put into design and engineering and consulting, which I appreciate we don't get back, regardless of what we do. My concern is that the current proposal, what we're here to vote on, may not result in getting a field for Fowler as quickly as possible. And my concern is that there may be better ways, quicker ways, cheaper ways to get a field for Fowler than what we're being presented with. And so I would like to get some questions answered about those other options which were initially considered or were at some point in the last 10 years considered, but the other sites that were considered which would not present the, as we heard from the other hearings in December and in January, would not present the same extraordinary or atypical design engineering challenges that the site directly in front of the school on Geddes would pose.
Okay. And we did look at other areas near Fowler. One of the taxpayers who is in ongoing communication suggested to take over the houses that are next to the baseball field. I did have communication with the previous mayor about that, and the response at that time was that, you know, those houses and the properties around there, they're paying taxes, so she was not in favor of taking properties out of the tax roll. There was also the discussion about the park. And again, it was told that we needed a special legislation, that wasn't going to happen. We looked at the Syracuse Developmental Center up there, the conditions of the facility, having to tear that place down. We will not get funding for doing that. So we did look at other facilities as a possibility.
So I guess my question is, you know, we are at a new kind of crossing point where we're 10 years in. I don't know how long ago the investigation of those other sites happened, but we're at a point where we're considering bonding for $20 million, which may or may not cover the entire cost of this project, whereas a new field on a typical site might cost $4 to $10 million. So what I might suggest is that if we could hear more about what that decision would be today if we looked at other sites. Let's look at not what a previous administration said about certain houses or not what previous conditions of the developmental center were, but what if we looked at that in 2019? Because we're already talking about the project is going to take 10 years if we use that atypical, contaminated, concerning site right in front of Fowler. But if we looked at other sites, the construction could take less time, could be much cheaper. We could actually get a field quicker for the kids at less cost for the taxpayers if we could do a consideration today and today, right at where things stand right now. Has there been any discussion about that?
Chris, you want to answer that? Cost?
With respect, afternoon, Chris Gravett.
I saw you on your hearings. I wasn't here on the council, but I saw you. So nice to meet you.
Fair enough. It would depend. Your question is, could we do it in less amount of time? Is your question? No,
my question is, when was the last time these other options were seriously considered? I know 10 years ago the developmental center was considered and rejected. I know that taking houses through eminent domain was considered 10 years ago. When was the last time that those other potential sites were considered, and what was the determination made at that point?
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know that I can't answer that question for you. I don't have the history of that. We've just been working here for the past couple of years, so I couldn't effectively answer that question. I'm sorry. I thought your question was the timeline, if you could build faster. So
I went to visit the developmental center during my tenure now as a superintendent 3 years ago. Was not 10 years ago that we went there to see that facility. So.
And talking about the houses, that was something that was considered just a few, like the last year or two of Minor's administration. It was talked about, and to be frank, I was on board with the mayor and her beliefs that you don't want to take taxable properties off the tax roll. We've already got, more than half of the properties in the city not paying taxes. So I don't want to kick people out of their houses with eminent domain and get properties off the tax roll, but I was on the council when this was, so it's not that long.
So and there's the information, the questions that we got back, the answers we got back from the questions that we had sent to the district said that there had been consideration of these other options. So I want to know when the last time that was done. So like the developmental center today, has it been, how recently has it been considered, and what's the determination today, or Burnett Park? How
That's
is it different than when it was initially considered?
Well, that conversation took place about 2 years ago when I became superintendent. That I went there and I had the conversations with the former mayor.
The developmental center is owned, the developmental center is now owned by another entity, correct?
Exactly.
The city doesn't own it, so they can't take control of it. And the last time that they tried to do this, it was about a 2 or 3 year process. And then the guy paid his bill, and we went back to square one again. It's my recollection.
Cool.
Councilor Bay?
Thank you. Mr. Superintendent, how you doing?
Good, and you?
I'm good. I want to first start by taking an opportunity maybe to provide some clarity. And while I appreciate the idea of, allowing the students an opportunity to see politics, I think we have to be careful not to confuse politics with fiscal responsibility, which is what we're doing here. This is not politics on our part. With all due respect, politics was either that statement and or the news article on Friday. But let me be clear, and I make this comparison for the students' consideration. It's very simple. Your parent has the choice or the option to vacation or pay the mortgage. And they understand that paying the mortgage, going on vacation could put the mortgage at risk. What do you think the responsible decision is? And that doesn't require an answer because the question is rhetorical. Everybody has the same answer. What we're talking about here is fiscal responsibility. I want to point out some things that's been stated over the time because I've been here for a good portion of this discussion. It was initially stated some years ago that there was no guarantee that this field would be sustainable past 5 years. They couldn't guarantee that whatever's under the ground would hold beyond 5 years. That was the initial statement. Just the other day we was told that, the turf would survive for 10 years. We understand that turf survived 10 years, but it's not the turf we're concerned about. It's what's under the turf that we're concerned about. There was a statement made or implied that by putting the field elsewhere, that it would be problematic to get the students to the field for gym class, a gym class that already takes place out on the field. And even with our engineers' responses here, it spoke specific to football on the field. That is not really something that could happen, but gym classes currently take place there. And so I saw that, with all due respect, to be a bit political as well. I think we have to be careful, when we're talking about or trying to send an idea, with all due respect, that the council is playing politics. Our job is to watch the money and to assure that we don't put ourselves in a predicament where we don't create something we can't pay for later on. And let me be clear, that we can't pay for it later on. Last thing I'll say, at least relative to this, $20 million, which may very easily at this point or by the time it's done be $31 million. Let's be clear. For something we can't guarantee beyond 10 years or possibly even 5. Because the track can't have any give, or you got to dig it up and do it over. If the field starts to give, you got to dig it up and do it over. You're talking about a field that could very easily be condemned 5 to 10 years from now and unusable. And we'll be right back here trying to find another field to play football at. It makes more sense to build a stadium that could last us 10, 20, 30 years, requiring only minor repairs, right? And while we know that there's concern about the hill relative to Burnett Park, which is ideal to me, I went to Corcoran. That's a long walk up that hill. Nottingham walks up a hill. Only one who walks right out the back door to a field in the city is Henniger. They're lucky. Hey, back up, buddy. Right? So I think we're just talking. This is not really a disregard to anybody, but you got to understand what our responsibility is. And it's not a smart investment, with all due respect, when you can't guarantee its usage beyond 5 to 10 years. And we're not just doing this, with all due respect, for the class now. There are students who will be coming there who will hope to play football 5, 10 years from now. And we could very easily have that thing yellow taped off, and nobody can use it because you're facing the same exact problem. Thank you.
So, can I ask a couple questions? I'd like to hear about the remediation and something relative to what Councilor Bay was talking about. What is the time that we're looking at on the? Yeah, Tom, if you can talk about the remediation, what would occur, and what the projected time frame on a stadium would be. And what is going on with the other ones, if there's upgrades and whatnot.
Could you clarify that question by what you mean by projected time on a stadium? Are you talking about its longevity?
Once it's built, how long it would, yes, longevity.
Well, I just stated that. Do you think I made something up?
I don't know if you made it up. I'm asking.
Well, you've been here for the discussion. You heard the discussion.
I didn't hear 5 years ever.
Well, you were here.
Well,
You were here.
I didn't hear 5 years.
Listen, if you watched the video, you saw the gentleman in the discussion, but you were here when Mary Robeson said the
10
turf
years.
is projected to last for 10 years.
10 years.
But
That's
you
what I
just said
heard.
a second ago, you're not sure if I made it up. Let's be careful that you're not playing politics, Counselor. Do your job.
So can I hear that? Because I hear one person saying 5 years, I've heard another person say 10 years, and I've heard 15.
Okay, Mr. Alisea, we put in the Henniger Stadium turf field. You have the chart there. The year was before I was here. 2003.
2002.
2002. The Henniger turf went in. It was replaced 2018. We got 16 years out of the turf field. You normally get 10 to 15 years. What Councilor Bay heard in the previous presentation was correct. We were looking, because of settlement, potentially having settlement and only having a 5 year, and then we'd have to do some work. We now have a different design in place with a slab, which should eliminate that. So we're thinking right now we would get 10 to 15 years out of the stadium. At that 15-year point, you're going to be replacing the turf. If there was any settlement, it should be minimal, and we would fix that at that time. So we would get 15 years out of the stadium. Some of those estimates that Mr. Alisea was talking about, those did not include baseball fields, tennis courts. So you have to be careful when you start comparing costs about a typical field. There's different attributes to each facility.
Well, explain that to us so that
Okay, so this
I know or whatever. If I
okay, so this project includes updating the existing baseball field, which is playable. It includes putting in 2 practice grass fields for our soccer teams and athletic teams, putting in a brand new turf field, putting in a stadium, putting in a concession building, putting in a press box, putting in lights, putting in tennis courts. The building used to have tennis courts and used to have a stadium. They were not in great shape. And when the county went through and put the new sewer in, they had to get all ripped out. At one point, the county was going to use trenchless technology and go under there. They couldn't do that. That project took 3 years. Then we did our JSCB Phase 1 project. That's one of the reasons why we're here today. That delayed things. We had to get that work all done. And then there wasn't enough money in the Phase 1 project to do the field, so we put it in the Phase 2 project. Now, we need about 11 acres of land. Now, if you wanted to take properties on eminent domain to build this in another place, yeah, that's about 160 lots, typical city building lots we'd have to take. It's a big piece of land. The soil conditions we have here, we have our soils expert here from Labella. He'll tell you this is typical. He was talking to us a few minutes ago. They have this in Rochester too, soil conditions. And there's peat in other areas of the city. So even if we did find another area in the city to put this where we had 11 acres of land, you're going to run into some of the same soil conditions. If you start comparing this to someplace, a rural district that put one in, it's a different story. If you're talking about building a stadium like a lot of the suburban districts did, where they had a grass stadium, you already have drainage in there, you already have bleachers, you're converting an existing field into a new turf field in a stadium. We're doing a whole brand new thing from scratch, basically. And we got some heavy geotechnical issues there, and that's what we primarily heard in the previous thing. We've had a lot of people look at it. I've been an engineer for over 30 years. This is by far one of my most challenging projects that I've ever worked on as a consultant or as an owner's rep.
Councilor Red?
I had a second question there, so thank you. And this would be for Dave Del Vecchio. Are you here to speak or are you here to watch? I'd like to know about the bonding on this. The bonding is JSCB through SIDA. What's the impact on the city on this, and what's the impact on the school district?
Well, at the present time, this is unrelated to SIDA. This will be city bond anticipation note.
Revenue bonds?
No, it'll be a bond anticipation note. we would issue in a few months when we do spring borrowing. I think our plan is to do the borrowing in June. So it'll be a city obligation. At the time we convert, this will be short-term borrowing. When JSCB goes to permanent financing, then we go through CIDA. And CIDA would reimburse the city for all the costs to date. That's typically how we plan that. But initially, it's a city obligation. School district will pay any interest costs associated with that through their budget. But then if a year, 2 year, whatever the time period is, the work is complete, it's part of the next borrowing through JSCB. Those costs will be included and be reimbursed by the IDA. Just like we did yesterday, I may add. We just closed on a project yesterday, the 2019 series. And some of those costs are covered.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, sure.
So in our sheet, I would say that the response on what sites were considered, it says no formal study was ever performed. Okay, so we've never spent money to understand the alternative sites. We have opinions, reactions from people involved. We have one concerned citizen, Rex Giardine, who relentlessly attempts to influence the people involved, who has probably done the most comprehensive analysis of alternative sites in the entire thing, and is probably the part that is being referenced. So the fact that Rex Giardine is probably the most, from what I've heard, that is we've heard those alternative proposals, and frankly, he has one that shows the sites next door, and the eminent domain involved, I think, like 6 to 8 parcels. So standing up and saying like 160 parcels, I find to be insincere. But there are other locations. There is Burnett Park. There is the developmental center. There is the houses next door, which could be an undesirable thing, but financially smart thing. But it's may not be worth it. And then it gets to the atypical nature of the site. I watched the hour and a half of recent hearings, and the engineers basically say, you are building a field on a pond. On a pond. A brook, I think. No, it's a pond. They say it's a pond because it's made of peat. The peat is 85% water. They say that's the equivalent to building on a pond. It also happens to have a combined sewage overflow that runs through it. It has Harbor Brook with a covered basin that they basically say we could break in the reconstruction of it. And then they talked about the contaminants. It's a brownfield. It had a car plant. It had a power plant. And the nature of those things, they're qualified. There's been a lot of analysis on the core samples, and it seems like we can leave it on site. But the idea that we might not find something else that makes it way more expensive than remediation is also a legitimate concern. So, and then when were the alternatives? This idea of sunk costs, yes, we've invested in this project, but it may not make sense to continue on this path because it's so much more expensive. We have to consider alternative paths. This is like microeconomics 101 is sunk costs. You can't continue because you invested $2 million if you're going to spend $20 million more than you would if you changed course now. We now have more information than we've ever had, and a lot of the information leads us to believe the atypical nature of this site increases the cost in such a way that makes this an irresponsible investment. It's not a good investment, it's a bad investment. So yes, we can continue to make it, we can do it emotionally, but yes, we all want the kids at Fowler to have a field. But we also are not a rich city, okay? So we have to be responsible with the resources that we have. I don't have a question.
I have a question.
Ms. Allen.
It's for Tom, actually. So from my understanding, you said that this field, if we added the slab, if we add a slab under it, then it would last for 15 years, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and so after that 15th year, if you guys go back in and we need to repair, do you have to remove the slab, or is it, because at the other schools, you're just replacing the turf?
The slab would stay. It'd stay in the ground. So any of you that were young enough to watch Carousel Mall being built, it was a big slab. You're basically doing something like that. It's also called a floating foundation. It's a big slab. Now, the peat is only on a portion of the site. That's one of the big challenges with this. It's only a portion of the site. So the slab is only on a portion of the site. Part of the site doesn't even need a slab. And that's one of the challenges with the site, too.
And so after that 15th year, or the 16th year rather, when the upgrades are needed, would the upgrades cost more at this field than they would at any other?
No, they
school?
would be typical. It would be probably, we'd estimate $2 to $2.5 million. It'd be very similar to the Henniger project. So the Henniger project, we had to take the track down, and it's basically asphalt like a road, and then rubber on the top. We had to take the rubber and the asphalt off. Then we had to take all the turf off, and then there was stone underneath. We had to put more stone in and do all that. That would probably be a worst case situation doing that. If things went good, we would just take the rubber off the top of the track and leave the asphalt underneath.
So the slab never has to be replaced?
The slab stays right in the ground, yep.
Well, that's in contrast to what the expert said who spoke for an hour, because he very clearly stated that
He changed the design,
he
Tim,
said
since
the,
then.
the nature of the peat and the nature of the
Didn't make it today.
unequal distribution of the peat across the site makes it so that it can give at any point. It can give within the first 5 years. It can give within the first 10. It can give at any point, and it's only after 30 years at which you've reached a state of settlement that is like you don't have a problem.
That's
so you said you can have a problem, and you know we're going to have a problem before 30 years. It's not true to say 10 years. It's not
No,
true.
there's peat at Carousel Mall. There's peat in other areas of the city. The way you get around peat is you put piles in the ground, which are like big poles, or you put a floating slab on. So he has changed the design since we did the initial meeting. The design has changed. And Councilor Bay was right. At that time, we were talking 5 years before we would get significant settlement. With that slab, we're not going to get that significant settlement. He's predicting a small amount of settlement, and he's done everything in that design to mitigate the settlement, so for the reasons you were talking about, so that the project should last for 15 years.
Can I ask a quick question, Councilor Allen? So, say you do have this settling issue at some point. Does that mean you have to start from scratch, or can you do minor improvements to get it back into working shape?
You can do minor improvements. So you take the turf up and you actually put rubber, and there's other things you could put under it. But we're expecting a real small amount of settlement over 15 years. Initially, we don't expect it because, again, we're putting piles and we're putting a foundation. We're taking care of the worst case. Now, if we didn't do that, we just did it without that, then we'd be gambling, and then we would probably get settlements. So that's why we've spent a lot of time and a lot of money studying this. We put more borings, which are holes in the grounds. We've had more people studying this project. And I know Councilor Rudd was talking about alternate sites. I'm not aware of any alternate sites that we could fit this on. The one site Mr. Jardine talked to us about is where the baseball field is, and we could fit this turf field in there, but we couldn't put bleachers in there, so no one could watch it. We have a big easement that cuts through there for Harbor Brook. So I'm not aware of any sites that we could fit this on. If there was, we would look at them. But we also want to use this for our phys ed classes, and we'd like to, we don't just want a stadium that we open up for games and practices. We want our phys ed, and we want the community using it. Mr. LSA himself walks on the Nottingham track all the time, and I've seen other people use the facilities too. It's a community thing as well as our students' facility.
For the next question, I can tell you for years I went down to Fowler and ran. I ran Corcoran many years. When I moved up to Tip Hill, before they tore it down, I jogged down. It was part of my deal. I'd hit the track for X and back up, and I miss it.
And now you got your new knee. We could try it out.
Let's go.
Let's keep private like private there.
So part of the discussions about the baseball field there, I played baseball in high school, and when I was there, every school had its own team. So if we're redoing the baseball field, does that mean we're looking to bring the team back to Fowler?
We're looking to bring in teams back to all the high schools. Right now it's only one combined team, but we're looking at getting that back, not only for the boys, but also for the girls, for the softball and baseball.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I would advocate for. I mean, I think on the one hand here, we're saying it's so important that each team has its own, each school has its own facility. And then the other hand, you've got different programs where you're saying they don't even need their own team, right? So I think it's something that is worthwhile discussion.
Yep.
And I want to go back because, Mr. Ferrera, you said that there were no other sites, and I specifically asked the question about the developmental center, and I think it may have been you, not quite sure who told me, we can't use that because of the hill. So that statement was made, and I know there's a hill, but that's why they have bulldozers to take down hills.
Okay. So
President Hudson, when you told me about that site, that's when I went there to check that site also.
Yeah.
I remember having that conversation with you too.
So those of us that go back to JSCB 1, we were going to use the developmental center for swing space because the building was big enough to fit 2 K-8 schools. It's a real big building. The building is stacked like this, like steps into a hill. We have one floor, another floor, another floor. It's all hilly. Now, when you get in the back, there is like a baseball field in the area, but that is even very hilly back there. You'd have to take that property probably under eminent domain. I don't know who owns it, and it would be quite a challenge. I do not think the state would give us the funding to knock those buildings down and to do all that. That would cost a lot more, I can guarantee
And
it.
I hear you, but the developmental center is way up there. The field is on the bottom half. I rode by there yesterday. You can look at Fowler, you can look from Geddes Street, you can see the bottom half of the developmental field. So that's a whole different ball game on the top of the hill. And I want to say this too. I asked about the slab that you're talking about putting on.
Yep.
And I asked a question about cracking. If it cracks, what happens then?
The slab has reinforcing in it. It shouldn't crack. Now,
Shouldn't. You keep saying that. You
shouldn't.
said that before, should and shouldn't. It shouldn't.
it shouldn't, but we can't guarantee it because it's buried underground. You wouldn't be able to see it.
Kelly?
Oh, it's 12 inches thin. So,
What? It's 12 inches thick.
I'm going to do the back for Kelly.
I'll think of our streets.
It's a 12-inch thick slab with reinforcing in it, inch rebar. It's not going to crack. That's why we're doing it.
So
Also,
no
just
buildings on the side of 12 inches, and I see a whole bunch of cracks, but okay.
so also the presentation you guys saw with Jim Stewart, that was we have changed the design since then. He got more borings, he got more information. That was with a preload. Do you remember we were going to put all that soil and it was going to push it down? We're not doing that anymore. We're doing the slab with piles under it. We're actually doing like belts and suspenders now. So Jim's presentation doesn't really show what we're doing anymore, which I'm sorry about that. Like, I wish we could have him here. He couldn't be here. But so that has changed. That has changed since November because of more information we got with the borings.
I'm sorry, is there someone that can walk us through exactly what the current plan is? Because I understand that the real issue, and even previously, the issue was the initial plan that we were given and that was discussed and talked about was the fact that, you know, it's questionable that in 5 years we're going to have problems. So what currently are we, like, just hold our hand and walk us through what the actual plan
You were also sent that November 2018 presentation by the Corporation Council to prepare for this meeting. So if that's not relevant, that's a major problem.
And sorry, we really were upstairs. We were talking about it. We went through it, and it really all came back to us that it did. It's so complicated. We got more borings. We got more information, and we changed. The designers felt more comfortable with this more conservative belt and suspenders plan.
I would like to mention to kind of make sure the room remains aware of what our concern is, right? Because sometimes things can get lost in translation, you know, and that is that we don't want to be back here not too far into the future with a similar or the same problem. Does that make sense?
absolutely.
Right, and so what everybody's attempting to do is guarantee us that won't be there. You know, Tom, I think you made I'm guessing you made a little bit of a dangerous statement there when you initially said maybe 10 and then was adamant on 15 years. And I'm just stating, you know, the statement in itself to me qualifies uncertainty, and I'm not sure if anybody's going to stand up there and say, yeah, we guarantee you 15 years, because we know you can't. You know, hear me out. So I just want us to be careful in that respect, because you got to understand our skepticism, all right? The last thing I want to say in this respect, and it's not an attempt to be comedy, we don't have Destiny money, right? They didn't even use all of their money, but, you know, we have to be clear about that as well.
We do have a 12-year warranty in the design, a 12-year warranty on the back. So we do expect 12 years. Could it go a little less? Yes.
Then explain the process.
So question
So who's going to walk us through
for
that?
Tom.
For Councilor Carney's question, Chris, are you going to walk us through that?
Myself and Nate will attempt to do that. Obviously I'm not a designer, I'm not an engineer by record, but I can certainly kind of try and walk you through it in layman's terms, in terms of what the concept is. So the initial concept of this was to compact the existing soil there. Upon furthering review, this is, please understand, this has been a work in progress for us for many, many, many months. It's a challenging site. I will say that you have the geotechnical engineer that you have involved in the project at this point is a person that spent his entire life in Syracuse, knows the soils here probably better than anyone else, commonly referred to as Dr. Dirt. And he likes that reference, so I'm not saying anything disparaging. As he looked at this more, he was concerned that the tolerances that we need to keep for the track, he looked at that closer and closer and kind of shifted, not completely, but slightly, his methodology for that. We're still going to do some level of compaction of the soil, but the idea now is to come in and drive wooden piles, telephone poles for lack of a better term, over a good portion of the site, the portion of the site where that peat material is most intense. It's the deepest, it's the greatest amount, has the greatest amount chance of settlement. Pour those, and then after that pour a concrete slab, if you will, with 2 layers of rebar in there, so there's 2 different layers in there, and pour that over the top of it. And he felt that that was a better methodology to prevent and give you a greater level of stability there. So we would come in, we would bring the site to grade roughly, because that site slopes one way, and push some of that soil that's currently there the other way to roughly grade the field, drive these piles, wooden piles, into the ground, and then pour this concrete cap over the top of it. Once that's in place, and in concert with that, we also have to do some utility work, some pretty significant utility work in terms of relocating a combined sewer outfall that currently runs through what would be the field. We can't leave that there for service reasons. That needs to move to the far end. That in itself is a pricey endeavor as well, in an atypical condition that you'd have. So we have to move that out of the way, and that comes to that. So after we've done that, we pour that slab, and then we bring in new material on top of that to the tune of 18 inches, thereabouts, engineered stone material, and put your drainage in underneath there, and then we build from there. I think some of the confusion has been, you have a couple different warranties, a couple different durations here that you're talking about. The turf itself, meaning the carpet on the field, that's a replaceable item, and as Tom said, 10 to 15, somewhere in there, depending on if you buy the extended warranty on it. There's an additional warranty if you install what they call a shock pad on it. Different things you can do, but basically 10 to 15 depending on, before you wear it out. No different than your carpet in your house, you wear it out. So that has to be done at that period of time, as does the track surface itself. The rubber that's on the track, that wears out too. So the design that we have, the design that he's come up with, is a performer that will get you to that point where you'd ideally be doing maintenance on the field anyway with the turf and replacing that rubber that exists. The idea being is that you're going, not that he's concerned that we're going to see massive amounts of settlement. The problem with it is the tolerances on that track are very tight. For obvious reasons, it's a danger if it's not. So he's not, the concern isn't massive settlement, that failure, but that even incremental could cause a problem. And therefore, we tried to coincide a design and be cost conscious of how much we put into getting us to a 0 settlement component, which I don't even think, and if Jim was here, he could answer it better than I could. I don't even know if that's a possibility, but to mitigate that and try and balance how much we spend mitigating that to the performance of the field. So we tried to get something that brought us to that middle ground, if you will, so that in 15 years, when you know you're going to have to do regular surface, if you did experience some settlement in the track at that time, you could address that during regular maintenance. So.
What would that, sorry to interrupt, but what would that addressing be? To what extent would that addressing make it different than a typical site without these initial engineering concerns?
You would do that, I mean, on a regular, just from a durability, it's going to, the durability of the track is going to wear out. So I want to make sure I understand your question more clearly.
He got it.
Yep. Nate Van Wee from CNS. The idea is that everything from the slab up would be no different than a typical field, right? So the maintenance, the longevity of the field, the carpet, the warranties, all of that, none of that changes from the top of the slab level up.
So what this new plan that we are just hearing about today for the first time makes the site from atypical to typical in terms of ongoing maintenance and repair needs?
coincides when you would do that repair, the maintenance that you would do. So yes, the maintenance is typical on any field, but the performance component.
You've described the site as atypical. You described the site as challenging.
Yes.
Does putting in this new plan that we're, again, hearing about today, does doing this new concrete slab with the rebar, does that then make the site typical as to any ongoing maintenance, repairs, et cetera? Or are there still challenges that are going to have to be addressed because of the atypical initial conditions in that maintenance period?
I would say that it makes this field itself more typical from a maintenance perspective above the slab. The part that's challenging here is that we're dealing with an organic substance, right? We're dealing with something a soil that essentially it rots. The hard part about it is predicting nature, right? Is predicting how and when they can. And we've studied that, and we've done these borings, and we've done these tests to extrapolate that data, and he has a curve that they've identified in terms of the settlement. And we've done our best to mitigate that. To answer your question, there's no 100% guarantee. I mean, he has a predictable curve that says we would anticipate this, but we can't. It is still, you're dealing with something that is there, inherent, and it's there. So,
it is an engineered solution, right? It's essentially an engineered solution to an issue very similar to a foundation, right? So Jim Stewart has designed a solution that is a foundation for the field so that it does not or will not settle. He is, to Chris's point, has computed the curve to calculate the settlement to get you the 15 years, and then you would take over for periodic maintenance. So I don't, similar to building a building, right? They design a foundation so that it lasts, essentially,
predictable amount of time.
Yeah, essentially forever, right? And so that's the same approach that he's taken with the field here.
So, all right, I will say, I actually spoke with some folks at CNS and some other engineers because I couldn't wait for this meeting. I was so excited about it. And I did understand that this was the plan, that it was initially there was just going to sort of be either pushing down or a slab, and then it changed to the idea that there was going to be essentially poles put in almost like a tabletop, and my question is, what do we believe the lifespan is of that slab and the pole? Do we, is it going to be, 20 years, 30 years? Is it more close to a 10 or 15, window? So when we go in and say, okay, we need to change the turf, we need to change the track, because I acknowledge that with a lot of it, you're going to have to go do those things regardless. On top, are we going to go down and check that out, or are we just planning on this is going to be, fine the entire time? I mean, do we have a way of checking it, and seeing, other than checking levels, I guess? I mean, it's
you could monitor the site to see, but again, the idea is that we've mitigated that settlement to a place that could be part of your regular maintenance. That's the concept. His curve is built, I think, on 30 years. Is what the curve is in terms of predicting rate of settlement. Okay. And it's, go ahead. No, go ahead. So it's built on like a 30-year curve. Again, we're not, and the idea is that if you experienced it, at what point, when would you start to experience it, and that to coincide when you would be doing regularly scheduled. So if we have a settlement issue that develops, it wouldn't be of a nature that wouldn't be able to be repaired as part of what you would be doing. Does that help?
So are you saying, though, that the expected life of the slab is 30 years?
The expected life of the slab could be there much longer. The 30-year component is what he feels that rate of decay. Okay. But being on piles driven through that, the idea is that stays.
Because, I guess, at some point far off in the future, someone's going to have to come in and replace the entire slab at some point, right? And how long would that be?
Not necessarily, right? I mean,
Not necessarily, no,
they're all built on slabs, right?
is falling.
Yeah, there's a,
Destiny started to have problems with their piles and the slab 15 years in before the phase 2 development. So you understand? So
This is on piles, though. It's different. This
Yeah,
is different.
but it was my understanding that the folks from CNS explained to me that that we've gone above and beyond what Destiny did. Because I had the same concern.
Destiny was floating, a floating
Yes.
slab. This is with piles.
Yeah.
We just had suspenders a few minutes ago.
there are, the other thing I would point out is that there's existing foundations from the old factory that remain there, still largely intact today. I mean, we
80, 90 years old.
Yeah,
So
we know that those
the
are.
goal is the slab would be indefinite.
That is the ultimate engineered solution, is that building slab, much like any other building foundation, would last forever.
And that's part of what I want to ask you. You said that the sediment, okay. So if it does start to settle or creep down, are there any, to your knowledge, any health concerns attached to that?
So, can I just in concept, right? So the whole intention of the slab is that the peat below it is settling or doing its thing, but the piles, right? So if this is my slab and the piles are, right, that the slab is not going anywhere. So that settlement that is below the slab is doing its thing, and the slab is staying there rigid and not translating that up into the playing surface. As far as
Go ahead. And I get you, okay? I do get you. But this morning, I think I heard on the news, because we're good for repurposing things, when you said the old foundation from the old factory is down there. And I'm sure it's a lot of other things down there with it, which is my concern. This morning, R.E. Dietz repurposed the building that they're putting everybody out of because it's full of lead. I don't want to see that happen with this field, and then we'll be back, and it's deeper than the money. It's a health concern for these kids. So I just want to.
So my name's Dan Nolan, I'm with Labella Associates. I did the environmental personally on this project. We did 57 soil borings across the site to look at environmental conditions.
Can you get a little closer to the mic? Sorry.
Sure. Is that better?
Yep.
So I can speak to that piece of it, and maybe just to back up, I think he was starting to get at that, but just so people understand structural, I'm not a structural engineer, I'm a chemical engineer / environmental engineer, but for the structural slab that they're putting in, they penetrate, if the peat's here, they penetrate and go down to a deeper foundation. So if that peat settles, it shouldn't affect the slab. Again, that's not
Shouldn't.
that's not my that's not my forte. So I shouldn't really even speak to it. But it's a concept that maybe not everybody understands, that those piles go down through past the peat to get on firmer ground. As far as the environmental goes, though, putting a slab over top of that and anything that's down below, which is historic fill, which you find throughout the city of Rochester, city of Syracuse, pretty much any Rust Belt city, you will find ash, cinders, slag, and that's the material that's down there. So that can be found pretty much anywhere. And once you put that slab in and then another 18 inches of material on top of that, you're creating a very nice barrier from any of the occupants of the property from that material. So it's really the belt and suspenders approach for environmental purposes as well as the structural purposes.
So I understand that for right above the slab, but there's a large part of the area, I know there's been concern about contamination, and there's other parts of the site that do not need a slab because they're more typical in terms of soil. Are there then contamination concerns about those areas? I feel resolved that above the slab, there's little to zero risk of contamination directly above the slab, but elsewhere where no slab is required, what about those areas?
Yep, so we did testing all across the property. Like I said, we did 57 borings. Then we did an actual additional 9 in the area where the slab was going to be. In that northern part where the baseball field is currently, and I think that's the plan for another baseball field there, we didn't find, there is historic fill material, but we didn't find similar material as to the south. It had less impacts, if you will. So there will be a field that we built on top of that. I don't remember the exact thickness of that field, but once they scrape back some of the dirt and soil there, they're going to build the field back up So that would be the barrier that you were talking about. And I don't know if there's a geotextile or anything like that going in, but that would be another physical barrier that would be put in, typically.
And is it fair to say that the soil is not contaminated, but rather regulated? That
It's
there's a difference in
regulated
those two
solid
definitions?
waste, correct.
Okay.
So it can remain in place. We've worked with the DEC on this. We have a soils management plan in place for construction that the DEC has reviewed and looked at, and we've worked with them through the spills group at DEC to make sure that they're comfortable with what we're doing.
So, just my last question. The three of you standing there, you have children. Would you let your children play on this field for 4 years?
I absolutely would, yes.
Okay. Okay.
I would just say that you guys are all engineers, and engineers build solutions, and I think you're good at building solutions. Like, I think it's policies, like strategy, policymakers' jobs to give you like a situation, you build a solution. I think you've done that, but I think that policymakers have to say, is this the right site? And I don't know that we've really done our due diligence to make this level of like, with the, I mean, we do have to have the physical health, as President Hudson talks about, certainty around that, and then the financial health of the city as well. And you've built the solution for this site, but the site, there may be other alternatives that make more financial and like long-term sense overall for everyone involved. And I think we need to make sure we do that due diligence and not rush because we're all emotionally invested in making sure we do right by the students.
All right.
I probably can't speak to all that, certainly, but I can tell you we do a lot of work for the, I live in Rochester, so we do a lot of work for the city of Rochester. I've done a fair amount around Syracuse here. At least from an environmental perspective, we're doing a police station siting for the city right now. They're taking eminent domain of about 6 or 8 houses, and all those houses have similar historic fill. So this isn't just specific to this site. Now, this obviously had some other uses in the past, but this is, it's a Rust Belt city problem.
It's more than historic fill, it's the peat and the combined.
Yeah, I can only speak to the environmental piece, yeah.
The factory, it's a lot of stuff.
Suzanne, did you want to speak? I believe the money's coming from the state, though, right?
Yes, I'm Suzanne Slack, CFO for the school district. Today we got good news from the State Education Department that they are going to fund the entire eligible portion of the project, which includes all of the field costs that we've estimated. So when the state funds a project for building aid, we get 98 cents on the dollar from the state. Every $10 million we spend will cost us $200,000. That expense will be over 15 years, which is the life of the bonds, and it's offset by that aid. So for a $20 million project, the real local cost is about $400,000. So this is just in addition to what Dave said. We do borrow the money up front.
Right.
Then we start the project. We get that money back once we finalize the project and we're paying the debt.
So state's paying for everything.
What does that mean? You can rescind the $5 million local share? I know the Board of Education passed an authorization for that $5 million.
So that is what the State Education Department called on today, and that will be funded by the state. Yes.
So it doesn't need the $5 million local share then?
Correct. Correct. We have been waiting since October for that answer, and it came today.
Great. If I could say a few words, Bryn, I just think when I ran for office, it was embarrassing me that every high school had a field except for Fowler's. That was years ago, and I had been told it had been going on for years and years and years. So I would just encourage my fellow counselors to consider, if we choose another site, that means going back to the drawing board, doing 2-3 years of research, 2 or 3 years of engineering, 2 or 3. This took 10 years to get to where we are here. If we go back and the slow wheels of bureaucracy begin to turn at their ever slow tilting pace yet again, we'll be sitting here in 2052 with these kids not having a field, and that's unacceptable. I mean, this isn't an ideal world. They shouldn't have built Fowler on the site they built it on in the first place. But it's too late to put that, once the cow's been milked, you can't get the cream back in the udder. That's it. It is what it is. And these kids need a field. The state's putting up the money. We're not putting up the money. I would encourage my fellow counselors to consider we've played out how it would be if the field fell apart. We haven't considered what it would be like if it goes well, or what it would be like if we start looking at somewhere else. I mean, I get the due diligence with other sites, but I think the developmental center doesn't belong to us, correct? That'll be 2-3 years of working out the logistics and legality of dealing with Russian developers who own that site or whatever, and Egyptian now? All right, whatever. Foreign developers who own that site, taking people's homes, that's another 2-3 year operation at a minimum. And then we'd have to start doing research again. So I guess there's an also game to play out. Do you want to be sitting here in 10 years saying we had the opportunity to pull the trigger, but we decided not to because we want to look at stuff that doesn't seem that promising to me? I'm down to switch track if we got another track, but it doesn't sound like there's another option that's very viable in my estimation.
We haven't spent $1 on any other option. Not $1, as far as I've heard.
Because
okay? And this is part of the problem in our state. We ask the state for a lot of things, and we want their partnership because they need to invest in us so that we can grow. And if we spend their money solely, then we're not going to get the money we want when we need it. Okay? I know some people say it's not our money. It is our money. We're all New Yorkers. Yeah, we're Syracusans, most of us, at least at this table and over there. But let's be real. This is our money. If we don't spend our money responsibly, and none of us here are out to harm anyone over here, okay, we want to do what's right, and we don't have a lot of money. A lot of us in this council don't have a lot of money. You know, we understand. We have to be smart with the money, even if it is the state. That's how we get more money from the state in the long run, by being responsible and making smart investments. I fundamentally believe that. You can say 2052, but it's all about priorities. Is it a priority? There should be other alternatives that are reasonable, that could be even better, I think. But that's what we have to do. Have we really done due diligence, not spending $1, understanding the other sites? People, do you really think there's not another site? There's Burnett Park, Henniger. I went to Henniger. Henniger's facilities are in Sunnycrest Park. The city owns the schools. We own those properties. We own the parks. I don't understand why a park can't be considered.
And the suggestion that the park would be that everybody would vote to give away Burnett Park, I'm not in favor of giving Burnett Park to.
Did we give away Sunnycrest Park?
We didn't give Sunnycrest Park away. No. But to build a stadiums that they're speaking about having, that would take up all of the upper fields and the lower fields also. I mean, you wouldn't have a park. You wouldn't have a central park for Tip Hill and for all the people that come from elsewhere in the city to use it. But I understand your concern, Counselor. I think that we, as the council, have been under a bit of a mistaken belief here on some of the information that we received. I personally thank everybody. I'm in support of it, but I'm in support of it because the years that they're saying that it's going to be a 15-year project and that it's going to be beneficial. I drive by there every day, and I'm saddened when I don't see a stadium. I used to sit in the stadium. A good friend of mine used to do, not the coaching, but he used to do refereeing in the stadium when the games were there. I've watched the soccer team up at Burnett Park, and it's it's not like playing on a slate pool table. Believe me, it's very, very rugged. So, anyways, that's my view on it.
Should we call the gentleman here? No. No public speaking. All right.
I just have one question for Suzanne, if you wouldn't mind stepping up, because I think my concern is that we end up back here without a bid that works, and I want to know. I don't want this to go on for another 2 years and not get bids. Could we get a commitment from the district that if we don't get a bid that works, if we were to pass this and we don't get a bid that works, can there be a formal consideration of other sites?
If the bids came in above the budget and were unaffordable, typically what happens in construction projects is we scale back the alternates so that you size the actual project to the funding that's available. That's the typical process. The commitment I think you're asking for would come from the JSCB. It's not the school district. It's certainly not finance.
Okay,
so I think what you're asking a question of would really be JSCB.
Because I think that if we could have that commitment from JSCB, I think that would go a long way. that we aren't doing this in a year and we're not back here in 2 years, and meanwhile the kids at Fowler have no field because we didn't do the initial due diligence on the site review, and we're just going to keep throwing more time at this without a field. So I think that would go a long way from JSCB as a commitment.
And we appreciate that all of you adopted this. You did not start this process. This is not your baby. You got on the board long after. But those decisions that were made a long time ago to build the school there, we have to live with that. Yes. And the decisions that were made to not look at the other facilities weren't school district decisions. They were city decisions that we made jointly through the JSCB. So if we don't own the SDC, we didn't spend a whole lot of time and effort looking at that. At the time, that was the direction we decided to go in collectively.
I understand what's happened in the past. I'm saying I don't want 2 years to go by. We have no plan. And
Understood.
And 4 years to go by and have no plan.
And we will bring that discussion with the JSCB board.
Thank you. So
yes.
In respect for everyone's time, we've been going for an hour. We're going to close the hearing at this time. Thank you very much for those of you who traveled to be here. We appreciate it. Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you,
My pleasure.
Suzanne.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.